Now, South Africa has managed to avoid recession in the fourth quarter of last year after recording 0.1% growth. It follows a contraction in the third quarter of 2023. The Federation of Unions of South Africa's Riefdah Ajam, as well as Black Business Council Chief Executive Officer Kganki Matabane, with us to help us make sense of those numbers. Good evening to you, and thank you very much for coming on. South Africa in a situation of GDP figures coming amongst weak growth and inflation that is outside of the target. Firstly, Kganki Matabane, what does this tell us about the nature of our troubles?
Good evening, Thabo and the Newzroom Afrika viewers. Maybe let's start with the context. So, as we are sitting now, there are around 20 countries globally that are at the risk of an economic recession. They include Canada, Ecuador, Iceland, New Zealand, and so on. And some of the big countries already, like Japan, are already in recession. So for us, missing the technical recession like we did in a country where we don't have much good news can be considered good news. So maybe we need to be easy on ourselves for a change and celebrate a little bit. Even though in the bigger scheme of things, there's not much to celebrate because we had a 0.1% increase in quarter four. But for the whole year, last year is 0.6%. If you compare that with the 5.6%, which is the highest economic growth in the 30 years of democracy, it means we were like 5% less. And then even with the 5.6% economic growth in 2006, we were not able to absorb the unemployed.
Yeah.
You can now with the 0.6% economic growth, with the population having grown so much from 2006, that we are really in trouble as a country. We are celebrating 30 years of democracy, but the economy does not necessarily give any indication of success as far as 30 years is concerned. So we really need to be concerned as a country.
So Riefdah, I mean, picking up on what Kganki is saying in terms of where other countries are sitting as well as far as GDP growth, if you look at some of the reports in terms of the inflation being outside of target, most countries predicting that it will only be within target, certainly, in 2025. So meaning that for a large part of this year, we are still going to be staying around this area where we are facing inflation. What are the fundamental problems that are maybe not interest rate related that we need to deal with? Because clearly interest rates seemingly are still going to remain quite high for a longer period.
Well, certainly want to share the sentiments that Kganki has there. It is a positive sign, but for workers, it is a bittersweet moment. We have missed the technical recession, and even though it is marginal growth, it is not necessarily sufficient for meaningful economic development and job creation. In terms of the specifics of your question right now, what we need is more robust economic policies that can drive stronger, but at the same time more inclusive growth, and that ultimately means placing strong emphasis on the importance of job creation to achieve stability, in economic terms and otherwise. And what we are calling on, and, the question is now redirected to Kganki ultimately, and now what ultimately can the private sector and government do to implement strategies that are focused on creating sustainable employment solutions. And this ultimately also means investing in sectors that have the potential for high job creation, such as manufacturing, agriculture and services. So in trying to arrest inflation, there are various angles that we can look at, but we we need to stimulate economic growth at this stage.
Yeah.
And even though those targets and the bands within which inflation is being tightly controlled, not only by the governor of the Reserve Bank and otherwise, the time is now for us to be able to move forward, because in the analysis and in relation to other countries, we have done slightly well, and that certainly deserves a slight bit of a tap on the back, but we should not be comfortable, because whilst taking a look at the GDP figures, we certainly should also be cognizant of what the unemployment figures look at that were released just last month.
Yeah. Kganki, if you ask the Reserve Bank governor, he'll tell you that lack of electricity, that's not something that will be solved by lowering interest rates. He'll tell you the education problems that we have in the country, that's not something that will be solved by lowering interest rates. The logistic problems, there are products, people want South African products, but we don't seem to be getting them to the people that want them on time because we have logistical issues. That's not going to be solved by lowering interest rates. So the question is, who will take responsibility for us being stuck in this low growth cycle?
Yes, remember the Reserve Bank have got a mandate, and the Reserve Bank governor is just basically implementing their mandate. But the people who are supposed to implement the economic policy, and we must just remind people that we do have an economic policy in South Africa called the National Development Plan 2030, and the challenge now that we have is that that policy seems to have been forgotten. You will hear it once in a while being mentioned in debates, but when the State of the Nation address, when the important things like the budget are developed, you don't hear much about the National Development Plan, because the National Development Plan has its own targets. So it will have targets, for example, on economic growth. It will have a target on job creation, and for example, on job creation, it says 2030 we need to create 11 million jobs, and 90% of those jobs are supposed to come from small business, which then tells you that from a focus, a point of view from the government, because government are the people who are supposed to be implementing that economic policy, so that they can make the environment conducive for the private sector to be able to create the bulk of those jobs. But the bulk of those jobs as per the economic policy are supposed to come from small business. But when you look at the budget, for example, or even look at the SONA, there's no serious emphasis on small business development and small business support. So one then wonders, but which policy are we implementing by what we are doing on the ground? Until we come and say, this is the economic policy. If it's not working, let's change it. But at least let's implement it. And then if it was implemented, you'll see then the focus being on those sectors that are emphasized in the NDP. But we don't see, for example, we don't see much emphasis on small business, at least by action. There's a little bit talk here and there, but when we look at the actions that are taken, you can even see the budgetary allocations by Minister of Finance do not give that much money to supporting small business through financial support, through grants, and all those type of things. You see most of the emphasis being on who will give so much money to the unemployed, who will give so much money to the orphans and so on. So we see more emphasis being on what may be called charity.
Yeah.
But the challenge with that is that once the money has been given, you are not going to get that money back. Okay. But if you give the money to support small businesses, they will be able to create jobs. They will be able to get people to pay tax. Those businesses themselves will be able to pay tax. And they will be able to also help you to remove some of the people from the social grants. So for us, that's where the focus should be. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be there.
Interesting you raise that, because I spoke to the NPC last night. The commissioner says they met this past weekend, and Lekgotla had a quite robust conversation, and there's an urgency, particularly when they look at the time that's left to reach 2030 and the creation of those 11 million jobs. I mean, in a nutshell, it's not going to be possible if something drastic doesn't begin to happen. We get on a corrective course. One of the issues is the ability, it seems, to be able to give SMEs, for lack of a better word, cheap money to be able to work. I don't think they know where they're going to get it and how it's going to happen. What are the suggestions?
And maybe just to assist, the NDP does not talk about job opportunities. It's talking about the real jobs.
Yeah.
So the 2.4 million that were mentioned in the SONA are not going to assist. So the money is there. I'm sure you are aware. PIC's got a lot of money. On a daily basis, they are investing that money into stock markets. They've lost a lot, for example, on Steinhoff. That money could have been given to small businesses. So the money, South Africa does not lack money. For example, there's a lot of wastage through tenders where a toilet paper that's supposed to cost you 10 rand, it costs 100 rand. So there is money. That money that is wasted, that 90 rand is there. It just needs to be directed at the right places.
Yeah.
So you just need to say UIF, compensation commission, the PIC, through the GEPF. Let's put aside this amount of money. Let's say, for example, argument's sake, we say 20 billion. And if we lose the 10 billion, it's fine. But if we make it with the remaining 10 billion, we're likely to grow it into 100 billion. But that is different from social grants, because social grant, once you give the money to 350 to someone else, you're never going to get it back through any other means, because those people don't even take it. So we just need to be bold. We just need to be decisive and say, it's fine, we will still invest in listed companies, but let's take the bulk of the investment and invest that money in unlisted companies, invest that money in supporting small business. We've got, for example, the National Empowerment Fund. The last time it was given money, and this is the only institution that was formed to support black people after 1994. I think the last time it was given money was around when it was formed. It was never been given any money at all. And then we wonder, but why are we not giving LEF money? Why are we not recapitalizing it? So the money is there. There's no question of no money. And what we've realized with the private sector, once government says, I've got this 20 billion to fund a small business, the financial institutions like the banks are also going to say we can match it.
Yeah.
But when they don't see any activity coming from the bank, coming from government, they're not going to fold their arms and do nothing. And we've seen this thing, for example, during the presidency of President Thabo Mbeki.
Right.
Some of these things were, and we can still do it. We can still do that because the money is there.
Riefdah, tough, decisive decisions to grow our economy, and we are going to 2024. Is there anyone among those bunch who are launching their manifestos who's got the guts to take those tough decisions that Kganki is talking about, certainly to grow this economy?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. And as workers, we are tired of empty promises that have been made. Kganki talks about work opportunities, and that is exactly the Achilles heel of what we are dealing with. Work opportunities have a lifespan. They are in no means decent. They are not permanent. We are looking for skills transfer to ensure that workers can be integrated back into the jobs market, making them more attractive. So ultimately, if there is not a plan, a pro-worker plan that can drive this economy, because we should not underscore the fact that where there is productivity, where there is performance, you need workers to be able to drive this, whether it is in the private sector or in the public sector. And we should stop being so harsh on ourselves in terms of the narratives that are out there. South Africans want to work. South Africans are tired of the indignity that have been suffered as a result of many own goals that have been scored by government as a result of the policy mismatches and the misalignments that we have seen now. The both of you have referred to the NDP and the conversations with the National Planning Commission, but it is absolutely dismal to see that not one of the targets in the NDP have been satisfied. We are way off course at this stage, and this is because of failure of implementation of these plans. We cannot keep resuscitating these plans and packaging them in different forms each time and expecting workers to buy into these packages. The NDP was translated into the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. We had identified the low-hanging fruits, and we had identified collectively through the social compact at the time when we were in the grips of the hard lockdown during the ravages of COVID. None of those elements have been dealt with. Number one, electricity. Number two, the issue of logistics, which is road freight, and the other corridors. As organized labor, we have made constructive inputs in terms of those elements. So the promises remain empty at this stage. And all we want to do is make sure that not only linked to the conversation in terms of GDP now, that there's meaningful growth and growth that will take us on a recovery path that will give back the dignity not only of workers but of businesses also that have succumbed to their demise during COVID. We need to sit down and we need to unconditionally commit to dealing with these issues. Investment in infrastructure, investment in new technologies, and making sure that we commit the funds, failing which the ratings that we have will only contribute towards the worsening situation that we find ourselves at this current juncture now, because we have the ability to do that. But unless there is urgency from both the side of government and investments, greater investments by business, we are faced with challenge, albeit the fact that investment in education and training is critical, but training and education for the future and the future needs of what we are looking at, considering the paradigm shifts that have been made now in terms of how work is being conducted. So there are a number of elements that we can contribute to this debate now, but we are simply tired of empty promises that remain unfulfilled. So at this stage, workers are watching, but this is ultimately where that apathy comes from. What next? Where do we take the conversations to?
Yeah, I appreciate you both. Thank you very much for coming on. That's Fedusa's Riefdah Ajam and Black Business Council Chief Executive Officer Kganki Matabane, call from the Black Business Council for the recapitalization of the NEF, saying it's one of the things that could be the quick fixes to some of the challenges that we are dealing with as far as growth is concerned.